Hey there, welcome to this lesson. What we're going to do now in this lesson is look at three really useful power chord shapes, and then I'm going to give you a really good exercise for learning how to sort of technically master them. So first off, let's have a look at the three shapes. So the first power chord shape we're going to look at uses the thick E string and the A string. So as an example, we could play the 5th fret on the thickest E string, and then we could play the 7th fret on the A string, which is an E note. And that shape there, if we play them both together, is a power chord shape. Now, basically the way you name these power chords is whatever note the lowest note in that power chord shape is on is the power chord. So for instance, in this chord, the lowest note is at the 5th fret on the E string, which is an A note. So this is called an A power chord. And if I shifted it up 1 fret and played exactly the same chord shape, that could either be called an A sharp power chord or a B flat power chord. If I played it at the 3rd fret, where the bottom note of the chord is on a G note, that would be a G power chord. And the really cool thing is the three power chord shapes that we'll learn, that naming strategy works for all of them. The only thing that changes is the naming note is on a different string. So if we look at the next power chord shape, we're playing, in this example, we're playing the 5th fret on the A string and the 7th fret on the D string. And this would be called a D power chord, and the reason is the bottom note of the chord, the lowest sounding note, is on the D note on the A string, so it's a D power chord. And if we look at the third power chord shape for this lesson, we'll be playing, for this example, the 5th fret on the D string, and then the 7th fret on the G string. And then if I strum them together, that gives us a power chord. Now the name of this power chord, as you can probably guess, is if we work out what note the bottom note is, let's have a look. So that's a G note, because this note here, the bottom note of the chord is a G note. It's called a G power chord. Now if I was to shift this up, say a couple of frets, and turn the G into an A note, that would be called an A power chord. Now as far as playing these three power chord shapes, I recommend starting off using fingers 1 and 3 of your left hand. There are a lot of players who use fingers 1 and 4, but for now let's just stick with 1 and 3. You can always learn the method of playing with 1 and 4 later on. So before I give you the exercise, I really need to mention something really important, and that is using the index finger, the first finger of your fretting hand, to mute. So if I go back to the power chord on the E and the A string, this one, the A power chord. Now basically if I had my fingers sort of up in the classical hand position, you know, way up here, and I strum all across the strings, you get a whole bunch of noise that you don't want. All the open strings are ringing out. So what you need to do is use the index finger of your fretting hand to lightly touch the strings you're not playing. So if I pick the strings one by one, so notice that I'm muting these. I mean, sometimes I don't do it perfectly, but the general idea is to use the underside of your index finger just to lightly touch the open strings you're not playing. Now the other really important thing to do with index finger muting is when you're playing the other two power chord shapes, you also need to use the very tip of your index finger to mute the adjacent string. So if I play the second power chord shape, the one on the A and the D string, I'm not sure if you can see on the video, but what I'm doing with my index finger is I'm lightly touching the thicker string, the E string. So if I pick that string, you notice how it's muted. So what I'm doing is I'm muting the thicker string with the tip of my index finger, and then I'm muting the G string, the B string, and the thin E string, kind of with the underside of the index finger. Now if I go to the third power chord shape, the one on the D and the G string, I'm doing the same thing. So my index finger is lightly touching, the tip of my index finger rather, is lightly touching the A string, so that's muted. And it's also like the underside of my index finger is also touching the B and the thin E string, so that sounds like this. Now because I can't use my index finger to mute the thickest E string, what I tend to do is use my right hand to mute. Okay, so that's basically how to play those three chord shapes. Now what I'll do is I'll show you a really good exercise. And the general idea is you'll start way up at the 12th fret, and you'll play the power chord where the root note's on the thickest string. And then you'll move over to the next string pair and play this chord. And then you'll move over to the D and the G string and play this chord. And then you'll go back to the middle chord. And then finally you'll go back to the one that is on the E and the A string. Now this exercise really targets the problem area that a lot of players have, which is being able to switch different pairs of strings when you're playing power chords. So what I'll do is I'll turn on my metronome to 50 beats per minute, and I'll demonstrate the exercise. And what you'll notice is I start up at the 12th fret, but then I work down fret by fret. I won't go through the whole exercise, but the idea is you start at the 12th fret and then work all the way down to the 1st fret. Or if you're relatively new to these sorts of chords, then I recommend moving down just to where things, just to where the stretch starts getting a little bit of a stretch, but not too much. So let's go through the exercise. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, there we have it. It's a fairly simple exercise, but what you could do is start off very slow, and then over a few practice sessions build it up to a fast speed.